Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin. I'm here with Sophie.
Hi.
Today we're gonna just talk about stuff honestly related to writing. I don't know, sometimes I'm talking about writing with friends and I'm just like, that was insightful, that was interesting. I wish I'd recorded that. That sounded smart. And a couple weeks ago I think we were talking about how it's hard out there right now.
Yeah, it is a rough climate.
Is the main thing.
Everything.
And so we were kind of talking about how we had both been in what one might call acceptance drought. I thought we'd just kind of chat about it because I feel like, well, ironically, I think our acceptance droughts have both ended.
Like right before we started recording this.
Yesterday. Sophie's in best Canadian, I almost said best American poetry.
That would be honestly a feat.
We don't live there.
Yeah,
don't
best
think
Canadian
you're eligible.
poetry, very exciting. And you just got 2 acceptances in one.
It's kind of a woe is me moment because I think that both of us have had periods of time where we were very successful in submitting our work. Like I know that back in the summer you had was it 6 acceptances in 2 weeks or something?
Yeah, it was like a very weird 2-week span. And like that was actually following a huge, a long time with no acceptances, 7 months, which I think for some people wouldn't necessarily be a lot, except that I submit so much. I mean, and also it's obviously very subjective, for everyone it's different, but I've had so many submissions out and I just wasn't hearing anything, or I was getting a ton of rejections, which obviously I think is very disheartening in a way. And even if you're used to experiencing a lot of rejection because you're a writer and you have to be, or any type of artist, you have to be pretty used to rejection, it can get really exhausting when there's no acceptances in there to kind of spice things up.
Yeah, we've both had these really good periods. You had that 2-week thing where I was just prettiest girl at the dance of candlelit.
It was so weird.
Everyone wants to every single magazine was just Sophie.
And I feel like you've also had similar periods where it's just acceptance after acceptance.
Yeah, I had my first story published in not long after I started submitting, honestly, but it's because I wasn't very choosy. I just literally would go on submittal and it'd be oh, they're open and it's in the word count, and I kind of just submitted everywhere.
Yeah.
And so in doing that, a place accepted me within a couple months. But then after that, I got a little more I guess choosy in the sense that there were certain magazines that I really just vibed with. I was I really like reading these magazines. I just had more experience with magazines, so I kind of knew which ones I wanted to be in.
Yeah.
And then in getting a bit more choosy, it took over a year for the next acceptance. And so at that time, I kind of was that's what I can expect. I can expect about 1 acceptance a year, right?
Yeah.
That was in early 2019. And then in 2020, I had a wild publishing year where in the first half of 2020, I had pretty much everything I was actively submitting accepted. It was 6 stories or something. It stopped because I was out of stuff to submit, right? And then when I started writing stories again later in the year, a few of them did get picked up right as I started submitting them. And then for some reason, it just hit a wall and it was just nothing. Because before yesterday, my last acceptance was, depends on what you consider an acceptance. Technically it was January, but I had a magazine make me do 5 rounds of edits with them, and so when they finally accepted it,
doesn't really feel like an acceptance.
It didn't feel like an acceptance. It felt like they were putting me out of my misery. It felt like I was begging them to let me die. I was please, I am a corpse. I am a husk.
Yeah.
And eventually they did accept it, but it didn't really feel like an acceptance at that point. And so it had been a while, and I guess for me, the only thing I start thinking is, are my stories just bad now?
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it's you start to, I think if you're used to external validation for anything, if you aren't getting it, it's your brain forgets how to do internal validation, and so you'll just be I guess I am terrible at this thing now, and I guess because I haven't gotten external validation the way that I have now become used to, it's no longer a worthwhile dream for me.
Yeah, guess I just lost it.
Yeah.
And I think also for both of us, coming out of a degree in writing, there was a lot of external validation there. You're feeding off grades, and you're feeding off oh, I got a good grade on that story, or the prof liked that story, or my class liked that story. When you switch out of being a student and relying on that for external validation, and you switch to the literary magazine submission kind of sphere for external validation.
Point, I definitely feel less easily shaken than
Yeah.
I did like in university, especially because
Yeah.
like if we would be coming out of like a not great workshop, I feel like
Yeah.
either of us could get a lot more easily shaken if, you know, one of our profs
Yeah.
was not happy with it. It's like so much easier to just completely question your entire identity.
For sure. It's like someone you know. It's different than like usually like a rejection
Yeah.
from a magazine where it's just like, I don't know this person.
And I don't know why they're rejecting it
Yeah.
either.
Yeah, so I think that both of us, it's not like a rejection, like really like, it's not like you're like crying lying on the floor. Like
No.
we're both good at dealing with rejection,
Yeah.
and we both know that like that's part of it, and it doesn't mean you're bad at writing. When I started submitting my work,
Yeah.
I was like the poster child for rejection. I dealt with it so well.
Same.
Because I didn't think there was any chance that anything was going to get accepted. And so
Yeah.
I was like, doesn't bother me, didn't care at all. And then now that it's been like years of submitting my work, as egotistical as it sounds, like I expect a certain number of acceptances per submission numbers, just because it's like I know how it works. I kind of know my stats. I know
Yeah.
where I know the market I'm submitting to very well. And so if you go like an extremely long time without an acceptance, it's like, what did I start doing wrong?
Exactly. Well, and it's also like when you're submitting your work when you first start out, I think there's no reason to like get your hopes up to the same extent.
Yeah.
And so now I think like whenever either of us like submits to a contest or something or some sort of like big like writing thing, there's like part of us is
It feels
like
achievable.
yeah,
Yeah.
you're like you have this whole dream of like what it would look like, and so it becomes like very realized in your head. And so I think
Yeah.
it's a lot easier to get like startled, but it's also like now it's not so much like I'll submit this and see if it gets accepted. It's like a career now.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount of like this is your career, and so when you go a long time without any like career success, it's like, oh my god, what am I am I messing up my career? And
There are magazines that I could submit to 3 years ago, and if they rejected me, I wouldn't care at all, because I would be like, I'm never going to be in that magazine.
Yeah.
Well, I've now since been in those magazines.
Yeah.
And so now, if they reject me, I'm like, wait, like
yeah,
I've gotten worse. It's
it
like,
feels more personal.
yeah, it's like, and it's not like I've reached ridiculous amounts of success as a writer or anything. A little bit of success skews your expectations.
Definitely.
And instead of it feeling like a dream, like
Yeah.
it would be a dream for me to be published in this magazine, but it's never gonna happen, you actually realize that like it is realistic now, and so you kind of do expect it a little. And so then when it doesn't happen, when you get rejected, instead of going, well, I feel like now if I get a rejection and it's from a market that is like one I've been in before or similar, instead of feeling like I was never gonna make it anyways, like the odds were so stacked against me, like the competition is so much better than me, it's fine. Now I'm kind of like, "Ugh, what did I do wrong on this one?" Because
Yeah.
I've been in contention or been published by this magazine before, so
Yeah.
I know I can do that. What did I do wrong this time? And obviously with one magazine, it's like, it's one magazine, but when it goes on and on and on, it starts to be like, okay, now it's been like almost a year, like since I had something accepted. It's
Yeah.
like, what am I doing wrong
Exactly.
now? Because I feel like I'm doing the same things that I used to be doing, but
Yeah.
all of a sudden it's not landing.
It's easy to like start really, really questioning yourself, I think. But it's also like, I mean, not to like make excuses for why it's been taking me so long to get published recently, but I think it is also partially like pandemic stuff, like people
Yes.
don't have
We currently
yeah
are in isolation
Yeah.
from COVID, so
Yeah.
that's, and I was literally like, because like, okay, to be transparent, we might have COVID right now, but we
Yeah.
don't know. we don't know, because we have to ration our rapid tests.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, I can't do anything for the next week because I probably maybe have COVID. I'm gonna get some writing done.
Yeah.
How much writing have I gotten? None.
Same. Oh my gosh, none. Yeah. Well, it's just so stressful, and
Yeah.
like nothing changes. And like we were talking about this the other day, how like our early COVID / mid COVID, like not literally
yeah.
having COVID, but like the pandemic, the things that we wrote were so like either so off the wall weird that it was
Yes.
impossible to write them, or the protagonist was basically like sitting there staring at a wall having nothing change.
Yeah.
And I think those
One
were
or
the
the
two
other.
options basically, because
Yeah,
you're
that
either
was
like
it.
in your insane era, which like honestly, I always
Valid.
feel like I am sometimes. But then, or you're in your, like, a different insane era where there's, like, you're like,
ennui era.
yeah, and your whole life is so static.
Yeah.
So what else are you going to write about?
We were talking about this a little while ago, how, like, with time, you start to kind of expect a level, like, you kind of almost start to expect perfection from yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So I was trying to write a story for a contest, and I haven't submitted to this contest in a couple years, but it's always on my mind that I want to submit to it, and the reason I don't usually submit to it is because there's a shorter word count and I don't write a lot of stuff around that length. I started thinking about this ages ago, right? The deadline was in February. The last time that I was like, I need a story for this contest, I will write a story that is simply perfect. I will simply sit down and write a perfect story with that expectation.
Yeah.
It kind of was like a magical moment, and I did write a story that was probably one of the best stories I've ever written in just like one sitting, and it ended up being longlisted.
Yeah.
And now, here I am 2 years later, and I'm like trying to do the same thing, and I'm like, okay, just simply write a perfect story.
Yeah, you're like, do it every time.
Yeah.
Like, what's wrong with you? You can't write the best story ever written in a second?
Yeah, right? Like, in my brain, I was like, simple task. Sit down, write a perfect story, win this contest. Obviously, that's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
I didn't even have an idea for the story. Like, I couldn't even get a story done. Like, I think I, like, beat myself up over it a little, because it's like, okay, in the past, you've written a story that was good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you just did it, you know? But that's a ridiculous ask for yourself. Like, oh, just sit down and write the perfect story ever. I mean, I don't know. We've both written quite a number of short stories, I think.
Yeah.
And you have some that just work. Like, there's just a magic to them. It's like you get the right idea at the right time in your life, and you kind of just sit down and all the pieces fit together.
You have, like, all the tools to write it, basically,
It's just something about it clicks for you. And not that it's perfect, but it just works, you know? And then once you do that, when that's not how it goes, you're like, why?
Yeah.
Why can't I do that every time? Like, obviously you can't do that every time. Like, that's not gonna happen.
And some stories are just gonna be like learning stories. Like, you draft it and it isn't really working, and you can't make those concepts really work together, but like it helps you become a better writer.
Or you need to like have some kind of drastic change in perspective in order to like make it work.
Yeah.
But it might be years before that happens even, and like you can't really rush that. But I think it's like writing's not necessarily like a repeatable task. Just because you've done something that's a certain level of good, which is very subjective, one time, it's not like it's like, oh well, now every story I write will be that good and it will always be that easy. When you have that like magical moment, and I think every writer will have that in their life, you find an idea where it just like it is kind of like magic, and it feels like effortless, and it's like I didn't even have to try to do that, it just happened. Then when the next story is like really hard and doesn't work, you're like, why can't I do that every time?
Exactly. And I feel like it's often you write that perfect thing or perfect, and then the next one is the one that's super hard because you're almost comparing it to the last one. You're like, why can't you be like your sister? Okay.
Yeah, because part of you is also like, I think when you write a really good story, part of you goes, oh, I hacked it.
Yeah.
Like, I know how to write a perfect story.
Exactly.
And so then you're like, I'll just simply do what I just did last time every time.
Yeah.
But like, that formula was perfect for that story. It's not necessarily going to work. And I think I've had probably 4 or 5 different moments where I was like, I just had an epiphany about how to write a short story. From now on, it won't be easy because I just figured it out. And it's like, no, I had the epiphany of how to write that story that I was currently working on. The next one's going to be completely different.
Yeah. And
that's not going to work. And then you get frustrated for a bit because you're like, wait, that doesn't work.
Like, this very, like, strong urge to hack writing. There's, like, everyone wants to figure out the way for it to always be easy from now on because it can be so hard. And I think it's also a combination of, like, perfectionism and imposter syndrome, too, where you're just like, why can't it always be good? If a story is having a hard time being written, or if you're not getting accepted, you're like, what am I doing wrong? And I think it's like, I mean, of course, like, sometimes a story's not getting accepted because it needs another edit or it needs a new point of view or something like that. But then other times it's just like there's so many factors that go into why things take a long time to publish.
The hard thing is, like, you literally don't know.
I was working with a poetry journal for a little while, for like 9 months, and I found, like, from the other side, like, there are definitely times when, like, I would I would upvote a poem and say, like, I think this is a good poem, I think it should be published. And then I would go back later to, like, look, because I liked the poem that much, and it would have ended up getting rejected. And so I think there's times when, like, one reader is going to love whatever the thing is, and whoever is, like, the editor-in-chief is going to dislike it, and vice versa. Like, sometimes our editor-in-chief would go through the poems that we had given, like, a pretty good rating, but not, like, the highest rating, and they would, like, pick one from there and say, oh, I think this is actually, like, this is really good and we should publish it and stuff. So I think there's, like, so much, like, both objective quality and then subjective taste, and then all of these other factors that go into it too. And then, like, even as a reader, like, sometimes I would just be having, like, a really intense week, and I would have to be like, hey, I'm going to be a week late with these submissions. There are so many factors right now that are, like, readers are taking longer to get their work in, and you know, then also on top of all of the normal things that go into why like a poem or a short story takes a long time to accept, and then why it may or may not get accepted. So
like, how many poems did you read a week?
I mean, I probably read, it would be around 40, I would say. Yeah, 35 to like 50.
40 poems a week for like 9 months. How many poems that you read got published?
Oh my gosh. I mean, first of all, I was pretty
harsh. I always said, I was like, when you submit to this journal, you don't want Sophie as your reader.
No. I was harsh because honestly, like, I don't want to send up a poem that I don't really believe in to the next person to read. And there are so many reasons why I might not think it. And there's some of them I just didn't upvote because I didn't think they were quite ready. And, like, I would not have wanted someone to accept my poem if it was like in a draft that wasn't quite ready.
Because do you have any publications that you're like, yikes, that got published?
I think I have ones where like, not ones that ended up getting published, partially because I, like, started sending out because I started sending out poems to really ambitious journals. Like, my first journals that I sent poems out to, I was like, we're just gonna swing hard and it's gonna miss a lot. But I have definitely submitted poems where, like, or short stories, or, like, at least one essay where, looking back, I'm like, I can't believe someone read that. That is humiliating.
Oh, no. See, yeah. My first publication, I'm like, I can't believe someone read that. And I like that story. I think they saw something in it that wasn't intended.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know what that thing was. I mean, you know what? They saw something in it.
They did.
That I don't see now.
I think that's part of why I was so harsh when I was reading for, and not harsh, like, I never sent, like, mean rejection letters or anything, but, like, I would just, like, downvote a lot of stuff, and that was because, like, if I submitted a piece that wasn't ready, I wouldn't want that to get published because I don't want to, like, end up having that piece going around and then looking back at it someday and being like, oh, this message was not at all what I intended, or, like, this wording is, like, actually offensive or something like that. Like, I don't want that to happen. And not that most of the poems that I was reading were like that, but, you know, there's so many reasons that I would downvote them. But then, of the ones that I read every week, I would say between 0 and 4 is how many I would probably upvote. So maximum 10%. Yeah. And then of those, maybe 1 would get actually accepted. So yeah, that's, like, not a high percentage. Of the 4, I would say maybe 1 of the 4, if there's even 4 that I'm upvoting. So a really, really low percentage are getting actually accepted. And that is for that journal, which has, like, a higher acceptance rate than some journals. So
Sophie's book coming out. First of all, go pre-order it. I'm trying to get this started where it's #join the Rat King.
I think that's really cool.
Because the book has a lot of rats in it.
So it's a very rat-centric book.
#join the Rat King. You can be in the Rat King if you pre-order it. But a number of the poems were previously published, right? And I guess I'm also thinking this because I recently edited my short story collection. But I definitely made a lot of changes to stories that had previously been published. And it's not like I dislike the version that was published or anything. But I guess I'm curious, like, how much did you find that you changed poems that had been published? And did you feel that there was, compared to poems that weren't published, a pressure to leave them as they were? Like, because it's like, this was given a seal of approval, like, by an editor, or to make it better?
That is a really good question.
Because I think I felt a pressure with the pieces that had already been published to make them better than the version that was published. Because I was like, this was already published. People already read it. People might read it again. Considering that a lot of these stories were written years and years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know, I had this expectation myself that it's like, I should be making the stories I've already I should be making all the stories better. But the ones that were published, I think, going into them, I was like, oh, they're already published,
Right.
They won't take much work.
You're like, let's make a limited edition version.
Yeah,
just for the book.
it should be like a limited edition version, like, you know, and the thing is, I don't really know what people think about my published stories. Like, every once in a while, someone will be like, I hated this about this story, but it's very rare. And so it's not like I really have, like, specific things where it's like, I need to fix that in that story. It's more just, like, this general feeling that I was like, it's already been published, this version has to be better. So I guess I'm curious what you felt like with editing your book.
Oh, that is a really good question. I mean, I think with poetry it's a little bit different because there's so few words that there's not a ton to alter, really. There's a few poems where, like, they'd been published in, like, a student journal and then in, like, a more, like, larger readership type journal. And those ones I found that there was, like, at least one or two changes between, like, the original version and now, which is, like, a fair few changes for a published poem, I think, but I could be wrong. I don't know what most published poets do.
I guess that's fair. Like, with publishing a short story, especially if it's a longer piece, it's more likely that stuff will, like, fall through the cracks in the editorial process. Like, I found typos in my published work. These were stories that I worked with the editor at the magazine, and those magazines have proofreaders.
Yeah.
And I found typos.
And, like, even in full-length novels, like, you find, like, wild typos sometimes. Think that, well, first of all, I'm not actually done editing my book, which is something that I did not know was a thing, but apparently you can put a book up for pre-order because it's still months until it's actually out before the edits are technically done. I feel like with poems, I'm so nitpicky that I end up working on so many edits before I even submit it usually. And so by the time it's, like, going into publication and then going into a book after that, there's not a lot left to do. And also I've, like, had a huge privilege to work with some really cool editors, like including at the, like, undergrad level. For poetry, I mostly changed, like, the format, I would say. Like,
interesting.
Move things up and down in lines and stuff, but, like, the words themselves don't tend to change.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you think that's because with more time to, like, sit on the poem and, like, maybe coming back to it with, like, years of distance between readings, you have more clarity on, like, what the form is meant to be, whereas maybe initially it's almost, like, kind of, like, harder to see, like, the forest for the trees. Like, it's easier to just focus on language, but maybe harder to see, like, what the format of the poem should be, maybe?
Definitely. Yeah. And I think I also, like, struggle more with form than anything else because I think I just, like, get so excited to get the words out on the page often that I'm like, okay, now I have no idea where this is supposed to even go.
At least in fiction, I'm kind of the opposite, where I'm like, I know what form I want this to take, but I don't know what the story is about.
Why do you think, like, why do you think that is with fiction versus poetry?
To be honest, I think I'm like that with poetry as well.
Yeah.
I just don't write poetry
as
as much.
Yeah.
I don't know, there's something alluring about form to me.
Yeah.
I think it's like, for me, a very natural part of writing is pairing, like, technique with feeling that I want to create. Like, that's a natural bridge for me to create, right? Like, oh, like, I wanted to have this feeling, so I have to write it this way. But what's the last thing that I know about a piece and is not very natural is, like, the events. No plot, just vibes. And, you know, plot's great if you can think of one. But I struggle to. So I think that's why. I think that it's just, like, for some reason, the way that I see stories first, it's, like, more from the technique working out to the concept than the other way around, which I think would make more sense.
I mean, I think also, though, like, your writing tends to be, like, there's quite a lot of voice to it, and there's quite a lot of, like, personality to it, so I feel like it does, like, not in a, like, gimmicky way. If that's, like, kind of the skeleton of your piece, then plot can be sort of more like the flesh of it, and I think other people's work is vice versa, but like I don't think either one is, like, wrong. It's just they're just different. You know?
It's not, I don't know why my brain works like that, but for some reason it is.
Well, it's like the vibes. I mean, I think
the
number of times that, like, we've been walking somewhere and we've been like, oh, this is a short story, and the other one is like, it's a short story, and it'll just be, like, kind of dusky out, but we're like, this is a short story.
There's certain, like, moods where you're like, it's a literary vibe. I
Yes.
don't know what it is. You know, like some days just have like a tinge of
Yeah,
literary.
you're like something's about to happen.
Yeah.
Even when it isn't.
Yeah. This kind of like, I guess, reminds me of another struggle that we've been talking about lately, which is why has everyone forgotten how to write a short story? And I mean, my sample size of everyone is like 3 people.
Yeah.
But everyone that I've talked to who actively writes short fiction is like, oh, I haven't written, I don't know. Because I used to write more short stories than anything else. Like, I used to write like 6 or 8 a year. Like, pretty much every other month I've read a short story. And in the past year, I have written 1 short story.
Yeah.
And I tried to write another one. Couldn't happen.
Yeah.
It's fled my brain, and I feel like I know a lot of people this is happening to.
Well, definitely our whole writing cohort.
Yeah, maybe just our writing cohort has forgotten to write a short story, but
if you know how to write a short story,
please tell
let us know how, because that'd be great.
Forget, which I guess almost like it circles back to what we were talking about at the start, which was like acceptance drought. Because for me, when I would get a rejection, usually I used to have like several stories lined up to submit. And so when I would get a rejection, I'd be like, okay, well, at least now I can submit the next story. Yeah. I don't have the next story now. Yeah. There is nothing else. If someone rejects me, you know, now when you get a rejection, they're like, you know, like, this wasn't for us, but like, please. Submit again. Yeah, submit again. And it's like, that was all I had. My guy. Like,
you can't reject that. I can't submit again.
Else. Or when they say, they're like, this work wasn't for us, but like, keep us in mind for future pieces. And it's like, that was the best thing I had.
That was future pieces.
It's like, if you don't like that, like, I have nothing better and I don't have anything else.
Yeah, that contributes a lot to acceptance drought, and I think also to like feeling a little imposter syndrome, because if you're like, I'm a writer, but I can only write one type of thing right now, and the thing that I used to like, that I went to school to learn to write, which is short stories, which I can't do it anymore. That is difficult. But I think also it's probably part of why I can't write short stories, is because we aren't actively in school for it, and also because like, I don't know about you, but like nothing really plotty has happened to me for a long time.
That's part of it. I mean, it was, we were talking about this with some friends that we went to school with a couple days ago, because I was thinking like, man, if I was in school right now, I would not be able to do it because I can't write a short story. And was I able to write short stories because the environment was facilitating that kind of thinking, and I was so immersed in them. I was reading like 3 short stories a week and critiquing them too. So they were like deep readings and discussing them, and always had to be thinking, I need a short story. So of course the environment was making me do that.
What would you say is your like ideal scenario for like coming up with a short story idea?
Let me think. I think my ideal scenario is where the story starts writing itself in my head anytime I'm not at the computer. Like, I don't even really have to know where it's going, but if I could just get a first line and it's like, anytime I'm not writing, like I'm just out for a walk or I'm making dinner, and like it's I can feel it unfolding, because then it's like, I'm not even doing any work when you sit down. Like, it's just transcribing.
It's just coming out of your fingers onto the paper.
Yeah, I would say that that's my, like, ideal. It's not just an idea, but it's, like, you feel it. Like, it's, like, growing in your brain. Yeah. And I feel like that's happened to me less and less. Yeah. Where even when I do get an idea, I'm like, this is a concept that I could kind of play with, but it's not really unfolding.
It's nicer when you, like, can't wait to write it down. I think that's, like, a way better feeling.
Yeah. Well, I remember talking about this a while ago, how one thing about the pandemic is you never have to wait to write anymore. Yeah. And so you don't get that feeling, because I remember being a student and how often I would be in class and I would be thinking about a story and I'd be, like, getting ideas. In my mind, I'd be like, the instant I'm out of this class, I have to go write this down. Yeah. Or I'd be writing down lines in my notes, and like my notes for the class are just like randomly like in the margins. There's just like random lines,
or like us going to readings together and both having our little notebook and pen like ready to take notes.
I learned very quickly that I have to bring a notebook to a reading, or like being on the bus on the way home and being like, the instant I get home, I'm writing this down. That like need to write the story. I haven't really experienced that since the pandemic
me neither
started. You have infinite space to fill with writing.
And so it will fill infinite space.
And so it fills infinite space, and sometimes that is with nothing.
Yeah. I mean, the last time I remember having a story that came to me that naturally, where it was like, I can't wait to write this down, was like, I think it was like 2020, but before the pandemic, or it might have been the summer of 2019. But either way, I remember like writing this story as I was like walking home at 3 a.m. from a protest. In my head, I didn't have a notebook with me. I like didn't have anything besides like my backpack, and I was just like writing it in my head and like walking through all of these like baseball fields and like backyards
walking
and stuff.
Home from places at night.
At night, yes.
Is peak story.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like that's when they happen. Yeah. Honestly, like need to start like walking places at night.
Yeah.
But can't do that. I don't know. I'm not gonna just do that by myself. I don't want to get murdered.
Really, really dangerous.
When you are coming home from places, sometimes you have no choice.
Yeah.
Like I remember I used to have like night classes, and so I'd have to walk home from class at night. And great thinking.
Great story time.
Thinking. Yeah.
That, or like walking home from basically anything you can walk home from at night, like work, school, a party, a protest, like anything.
The later the better.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That was such a huge thing pre-pandemic, was like just coming home late from things, and sometimes like you might be with a friend but you're not necessarily talking, and so you're just thinking about it.
Yeah. Well, because at the start of the pandemic, I remember us talking about this, like the summer of 2020. Both of us were like, I can't write a short story.
No.
Like, I have forgotten how. We were talking about the one story I tried to write that summer, how that summer I had one idea for a short story, and it was the most ambitious story idea I've ever had in my life, and I wrote it, but it doesn't work. Like, the idea is cool, but like...
It is very cool.
Nothing is accomplished with the characters, like nothing is said about them. Should be high stakes, but like nothing is done with the stakes. And that was even kind of forced. Like, I think part of the issue with that story is I didn't hear it. I couldn't like create that mental connection to it.
Yeah.
Where if I was out for a walk, I would just start hearing the voice, you know? And
exactly.
It's like, without that, you can't really feel the character. And I think for both of us, following the voice is like kind of a technique that we use a lot.
Yeah.
And it's like, if I can't hear the character's voice, I can't really write the story. It's like, I kind of know who this character is, but I can't, like, learn about him in a way that would be meaningful to explore if I can't, like, connect with his voice naturally. And it just didn't happen. But I think, like, why that was happening, we couldn't get ideas, is like, there's nothing. Yeah. What was there to get ideas from?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, like, frankly, the only people that we saw for that part of the pandemic was each other.
Yeah.
And, like, love you very much, but we have known each other for years, and I'm not going to get a new idea from being like, Shaylin's an interesting character. It's like, I knew that already.
And I think part of it is also both of us don't really write about people
about
we
real
know,
life people.
Or people. And so it has to be more
watching
abstract.
Yeah.
Like, it has to be almost, I feel like most of the ideas that I get, like, technically they do come from real life, but I don't really know how or where, or it's like a very weird way, like someone will say something and I'll just be like, oh, and it really twists into an idea or something.
Exactly.
I don't think there was really anything that was gonna happen from just like
us sitting in the dog park like for the third day in a row.
It's like nothing to do and no one else. That's the kind of thing where if you tell like non-writers or family about that situation, you're like, yep, it's just been me and my roommate home for 2 months, we haven't seen anyone else, they'd be like, oh my god, that was such a great short story. And it's like, no, it's not.
The thing is that we didn't have any drama, because we would just be like, do you want to watch TV? Yeah, sounds good. You know, it could be a setting for a short story, but I feel like we both just kind of went about our days.
A great one.
When I'm like coming up with a character or like coming up with a story, I want to like feel like I am so excited to find out what that character is going to do next.
Yes.
And like almost like I'm hanging out with them, but also like I'm so engrossed in the story that I want to write it so I can find out. Yeah.
You know, when you're kind of like, let's say you're with a friend and they're introducing you to their friends or something. You're hanging out with people that you don't really know, and there's that like one person that's like a lot.
Yeah.
Not necessarily in like a bad way.
Yeah.
But they're just like the biggest personality in the group.
Yeah.
And as the outsider, maybe this is just me being like a super introvert talking. You're not super involved in the conversation. You're just like a witness to like this person. But because you don't know them, it's kind of a surprise. It's like, I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know what they're going to say. They're probably going to suggest something wild. Don't know what it is.
Yeah, let's see what they bring to the table.
Not that that I've ever gotten an idea from that context, but I feel like
It's
that's kind
what
of
it
what it
feels like
feels like when
to have a
you're
new character.
meeting a new character. Yeah.
But I think part of it is that, like, it's very hard to write when the thing that's going to happen next in your own life is that you're going to sit around and do nothing.
Yes.
And, like, obviously, like, that is such a privilege to, like, be able to say that. I mean, like, obviously, like, the pandemic has been, like, way worse for people who, like, weren't able to keep their job
Yeah.
or something like that. But, like, there really is less to write about right now for, I think, almost
Pretty
everyone.
much for everyone.
Unless you're, like, a pandemic scientist. I don't think
Yeah.
there's a lot that you can write about right now.
It's very hard to have variety in your routine, whatever that routine
Yeah.
is, I think. One thing for me that I think kind of weird was, so, like, I couldn't come up with an idea for anything at the start of, for the first, like, the spring and summer of 2020.
Yeah.
And then in the fall, I had an amazing short story streak.
Yeah.
I wrote, like, a ton of short stories from, like, the fall to, like, January of 2021, and I don't know where any of those ideas came from, and I don't know what was different, because life was also pandemic-y, and there was, like, a really bad wave around
a really
that time.
bad wave. Yeah, I think
So I don't know where the ideas were coming from, but it's like all of a sudden I
Yeah.
was able to draw ideas from nothing, when before I couldn't, and now it's like I'm unable to draw ideas from nothing again, you know?
Yeah.
The way it feels for me when I can't get ideas is it's like, I'm like, I've used every possible idea I could
There's
ever
no
think
more.
of.
I feel like maybe it's like almost when a cat gets the zoomies out of nowhere. You know, it's what it, like, I feel like sometimes my brain feels kind of like that. I feel like where it just comes out of nowhere and suddenly you have all these ideas. But honestly, like, I have not been even, like, not just short stories, but I have barely been writing fiction throughout the whole pandemic, which is weird to me because, like, because I feel like poetry has been my main thing for a little while, but, like, even more so since the pandemic.
Do you think there's a reason why you can get ideas for poems but not fiction?
I think I write fiction better in, like, chaos in a way, because it feels like I'm structuring my life, whereas when everything is a lot more, like, kind of calm, I think poetry is easy because it doesn't really, it can just kind of, like, float around and do its own thing all over the page. And so I think that's part of it. And I also think, like, poetry is a lot easier if you have a shorter attention span. And I feel like my attention span has been just shot. Like, there is no attention span. So I think that's part of it too, is like, because I'm still reading fiction and I'm still, like, interested in fiction. But it's just, like,
Writing it,
writing it is so, even when I have ideas,
because
it's
I
so
feel
hard.
like for me with fiction, so I had, like, that one short story streak, which was awesome. Would love to get that back.
Yeah.
Don't know how, don't know why it ended.
Yeah.
I think the only reason I've been able to keep writing fiction through the pandemic is because I had pre-existing novels that I'd already been working on.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have to think of anything new. Like, it's been coming up with new concepts that I feel like has been so hard for me. I've gotten one idea for technically got two ideas for a novel, but the first one is not very good, and I don't think I'm ever gonna write it, so I don't really count it. Like, it didn't pan out, you know.
Right.
I've gotten one idea for a novel. I haven't really, like, made much progress on it or anything, but I feel like the only reason I've been able to keep working on fiction is mostly just because I had pre-existing projects, one of which was, like, time to edit, so it's like I don't have to really think of new things. I'm just editing this. There was, like, a level of familiarity, I think, that it's like you don't have to forward something new.
Editing is such a lifesaver sometimes when you have no ideas but you still want to write, because you can just, like, remove and add the same sentence 200 times.
And honestly, like, I have gained an appreciation for editing over the pandemic, because before I would have said that it was my least favorite part of writing, just because it's more, I don't know, like, there's just something kind of, like, magic about writing a first draft and, like, seeing it unfold, and then now you're like, okay, now I have to go deal with all my messes. Having a party is great. Cleaning up after it the next day, less fun. I always kind of felt like editing was just, like, cleaning up my messes afterwards, and it's just, like, less exciting. So you've already told the story, but I think I've definitely gained an appreciation for it in the pandemic, because it was the only, like, realistic form of writing that I could do a lot of the time. I didn't really write anything this past summer because I was very burned out, and then when I got back into writing in the fall, I haven't really even drafted anything. Like, I just had, like, an editing phase. If I were trying to draft, I don't even know if I would have been able to get anything done. Like, it's only because of editing that I've been, like, writing, really.
Yeah, and I think that editing, like, is a version of creating something, because you are kind of, like, taking the, like, rough clay of your
Like, refining
draft and refining it. But it feels like when you first start writing, I think editing does not feel like creating something.
Yeah.
It feels like just, like you said, cleaning up.
Yeah.
Which like feels boring, but then you realize like how much you're improving your draft and how much you're like making something new out of it.
Learning to find like a feeling of creative like fulfillment out of editing is what has made it like more enjoyable for me. And now it's like I actually do enjoy editing quite a lot. And you know, still would I rather be drafting things? Yes, but I think I've also realized that like I can't sustain just drafting all the time. I always used to feel like writing is like so fun, it's kind of magical, and maybe part of that is because I knew I was gonna edit later, so it was like I can mess this up. There was that safety net, and then when you get to editing, it's almost like frustration with your past self, where it's like, okay, if I just like been more careful, maybe we wouldn't be here.
Going back to what you said before about kind of the desire to write the perfect draft, editing sometimes when I first started writing felt like I failed in the first draft, because I was like, if I had written a perfect first draft, then we wouldn't need to edit anything. But obviously, like, if that's even possible, it's very rare.
Yeah, the revelation that changed everything was editing is not a punishment for bad writing.
Yeah.
When you have to edit, it's not like this is punishment for the fact that you didn't do it perfectly the first time. It's just a different way to access the story. Part of the biggest thing for me was also seeing how mistakes in my novel, that if I had not made them initially, like, fixing those mistakes added an entire new layer to the story. And a lot of the stuff that I had to fix, it didn't just fix the problem, like it made the book exponentially better. And so it kind of was like, oh, like messing it up is actually good.
Part of the
like,
writing.
It will kind of benefit you later if you mess it up when you're writing the first draft.
Well, and I remember you talking too about like, you know, yes, in your novel there were characters you had to remove and characters you had to add and stuff like that, but also it, like you mentioned, certain plot points you thought were going to be like a minor plot point that only takes a chapter, and they ended up being and they ended up being like a huge part of the book. That easily could have been us in 2020.
Yeah, us.
This plague will only take a chapter.
Takes the whole book.
Takes the whole book. But that easily could have been a mistake.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. But like it could have been because you didn't know yet because you were just drafting. So like, because in drafting you don't know what's key to the story and what's a mistake. You know, and you can't know until you draft.
The reason I realized that the plague in my novel, which is a pretty significant part of the novel, I mean, it's a plague. When I first started the book, I think I saw it as cleaner than it actually was. My original idea for the structure was, I was like, okay, so every single chapter is just going to follow another weird bad event happening in this town, and that will be a very neat escalation of the town being turned against the main character.
Like a pattern of the same thing over and over.
Very clear, that was my idea, and I was like, okay, the first little mini disaster that's going to happen is going to be the plague. It's just going to exist in that one chapter. And every single time I had like 3 workshops, I think, or 4 workshops for the first section of the book, everyone was like, I feel like this plague should be a bigger deal. Like, there was literally a plague, and people are just like, don't talk about it anymore. And it's because in my mind I was like, that's the structure I'm going for, right? A weird thing happens in every chapter. But it was having people comment on it and be like, this plague seems important, like they should be extremely relieved that it's over, like did it just last one winter? And after like actually thinking on it, I was like, oh, like, yeah, that's a huge thing that happened. And it now like does go throughout the whole book, but my initial vision of how the story would be structured was very different and was so clean. And I think that's natural. Like, as you write a book, your vision of it is initially going to be really clean, but once you start writing it, it's like, it demands more, sometimes messiness, honestly. But that's good. Like,
I mean, that's real life, too.
The messiness kind of makes it more believable, I think.
I think it's also letting things impact your characters, because I don't know about you, but like I often get a weird impulse that I think is counter to writing well, that is like, okay, well, this will derail things for the characters and we need to keep pushing towards the plot. And it's like, well, shouldn't things be derailed for the characters so that we can see how they react to that? And that's the whole way that you make things happen, is if you derail stuff for the characters. If nothing ever went wrong, then you wouldn't have a story.
I think it's an impulse too, because I do think for some people it comes from an impulse of like, don't want bad things to happen to my characters. I don't think that's the case for either of us.
No.
I think both of us tend to be like, my novel is a 300-page emotional torture chamber.
Yeah, definitely.
For the main character. So I think, like, I don't think either of us have an issue about, like,
hurting
them a little. I think it's almost this subconscious knowing that threading the consequences will be difficult to write.
Yes.
And so you almost stop yourself because it's like, that's going to be really messy and complicated to deal with, as consequences usually are more messy and complicated than the event itself.
Yeah.
But
and so you avoid the event.
Yeah, I think, well, for me, I find I write the event and then I don't write the consequences because that's harder, and it's easy as a writer to just think about the next event and be like, jumping to the next event, because that's the next, like, clear-cut aspect of the plot that I can see. There are a lot of things where I'm like, now that I've finished a novel and done like a million drafts of it, I know the things that I would pay closer attention to next time, and one of the biggest ones is consequences. I think that was one of the biggest things that I didn't think about enough, and even when there were consequences, I didn't necessarily play them out like fully. If I had been more mindful of that, I could have saved myself like months of editing probably.
A lot easier to just not write the consequences. Just like it would be a lot easier in real life if you could just do stuff and not have consequences.
I think part of it is also because often the way the consequences manifest in fiction is a bit subtler, so it's like harder to imagine. Like, it's easy to be like, okay, so the next event that I want to have to happen, that's going to be like a big thing that happens that's clear cut, whereas it's harder to imagine the subtle ways that the consequences will like permeate over a long period of time. And so sometimes you can't really imagine that initially, and so it's easy to like gloss over it, I think, in my experience.
Really good examples of that are like in long-running TV shows, how like you'll see like a little pattern of consequences, and then often in the last episode of a season, it'll like, you'll see all the consequences. Like, I just finished watching BoJack Horseman, and like the last episode is basically like every consequence, or not last episode, but not even really spoilers, just like this is how TV works, but he faces a lot of consequences in the last few episodes of the show for like everything that's happened in the whole show. Or the same with like Breaking Bad, like there are things in the last couple episodes that are callbacks to like season 2 and season 1, and like small things that they did then. And I think that that's like a really good example of like how writing a novel, ideally you want to have it go similar, is like you'll see the little consequences, and then maybe at the end you'll also see the huge consequences. There may
be like unforeseen consequences that maybe don't show 5 pages after, but maybe they do show 300 pages after. And it's definitely harder to understand how those things will happen before you've written the book, because it's so tricky. Like, it's just like little threads of things. Like, it can be very hard to know how that's all going to pan out.
Well, the consequences can be unforeseen, like for us as the authors too, which is kind of, I think, intimidating as well, because like the unknown is always going to be scary, and so looking at your book and being like, I don't even know what the consequences of the characters' actions will be, is like a hard thing to do. Like,
how far into your novel would you say you were, like percentage-wise, if you were ballparking, before you realized the whole general arc of the book?
I would say like, honestly, probably a third of the way, and there are still things that I'm deciding.
I would say it was like not like necessarily everything, but like kind of knowing like the general endpoint.
I would say like a third of the way through.
I would say about same, like somewhere between a quarter and a third. How long do you think it was before you knew what the theme was? Well, okay, because I think there's like knowing what the theme is, like almost like you can feel it, and then there's like being able to explain, like if I walked you and I was like, so Sophie, what is the theme of your novel? And you could clearly be like, wow, the theme is like, I don't those were different moments for me, I think.
I agree. I would definitely say so. Like I think the first one, like you said, is like the feel of it, and it's when you could like tell someone the vibe of the theme, but not the actual theme. Honestly, sometimes I'm still like, I don't know if I know the theme, but the theme was honestly probably one of the first things that kind of fell into place, because I think it's a very themey novel.
I think you tend to figure out the theme a lot earlier than I do.
I think just because, like, like you were saying, like, that's, some people write, like, this thing first, and other people write this thing first, and I think that, like, the general, like, what is this novel exploring was, like, one of the first things that kind of fell into place for mine. What about you?
I would say, at what point did I know the theme of my book? I think, well, to be fair, to give myself more credit than I was about to, when I titled it,
That's true.
Which was actually very early on. I think I knew that that title made sense because it reflected the theme. There's a level of being able to explain it,
right.
like sit down and be like, this is the theme, that I was still having revelations about a month ago.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I mean, it's...
Like, when I was doing draft 7.
It's really hard to, like, fully know the theme because, like, yeah, you're always adding new things and subtly changing it. Do you think when you titled it, it was more of, like, a subconscious knowledge of the theme?
I think so. So, the way I titled my novel is because I was reading an article about witches.
Of course.
There was, like, a picture of the oxymels, and there was, like, a little description about what it was. I was like, oh, that's really cool. I knew that I was writing a book where my main character was a herbalist, and so I thought that probably the title should reflect that, because I wanted the title to be, like, you know, in the world of the story. I don't know if I saw it or if I wrote it, but just the phrase honey vinegar, I was like, oh, I think that I want that to be a chapter title.
Right.
And then after thinking on it for a moment, I was like, I actually think maybe that's the title of the book, because I mean, to be fair, I think my book had a bit of an obvious theme baked into it. Like, if you're writing a book about someone who's being turned into a myth, like, obviously a central theme of that is going to be the discrepancy between truth and myth.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
But I don't think it was until much later that I realized, I think for a long time I thought the theme of the book was about the discrepancy between truth and myth, when I think it's actually about the moment truth becomes myth.
Yeah.
I think that's what took me a very long time to figure out, is this isn't a book about the difference between them. It's the point about where they converge and the moment you decide to become the myth about you.
Yeah, like more of the decision point or the turning point than it is about like the overlap.
So I think that was like a nuance that took me until a lot later to figure out. But I think the general theme I knew from the very beginning, partly just because that feels inherent to the concept. I think it's hard to write that concept without that. More general themes, I think, just started to appear. Like, I think that, like, my novel is kind of, you know, like the, like, myth girl genre of fiction, but I do think it has different themes, because I feel like that, like, myth girl fiction typically is about, like, girlhood and sexuality.
Definitely.
But I think that my novel is more about power and legacy, I would say, are, like, the central themes. Not because I was, like, trying to be different or anything. I think my character's just, like, not.
She's, like, very literally not like other girls, but not in a pick-me way, in, like, the opposite of a pick-me
like,
way.
Maybe, like, a non-binary way.
Yeah, she's like, don't pick me, I bite. Like, I am not interested in being picked.
I think there's, like, a softness that, like, myth girl fiction kind of usually explores in their characters that mine does not. And so I think that that's where those themes came in, was honestly through my character. Like, I think with a different character, it could have been about girlhood and sexuality, but I think with the character that I had, she was like, I don't care about girlhood and sexuality, I care about power and legacy. Like, it was more about just, like, her priorities, I think.
Yeah, but she's like, I have neither girlhood nor sexuality.
It was clear, but it was pretty clear for you.
I mean, I don't actually know. Now that you're saying that, I'm like, I think I know more like the like overall, like, one word themes of my novel and less the central theme, if that makes sense.
I think that makes sense. I think because I think that it's easier to hone in on the because I would say I misidentified the one word themes. I would have said, I mean, it is still a theme, but I wouldn't see, initially I was like, I think the main, like, one word theme is motherhood. Yeah. But not in the literal sense.
Yes.
Necessarily.
Almost like a godhood version of motherhood, I feel like, is in your story.
I don't know if that's necessarily a central theme, so I think I was a little wrong on that one. But I think it makes sense that you would normally figure that out first.
Yeah, because I think I definitely, like, I was like, okay, yeah, I mean, it's about, like, masculinity, and, like, brotherhood and, like, that kind of thing. Now I would say, I think that, like, a central theme is definitely, like, I don't know if it's the central theme, but at what point does, like, one person, like, kind of become another person, or, like, almost like a ship of Theseus idea, or, like, almost like the idea of, like, possessing someone by, like, taking some part of them, or, like, that kind of thing.
I remember when we first started working on these novels, and this would have been, like, a long time ago, this would have been, like, 2018, and we were talking about them, and I was like, I feel like both of our novels are kind of like the final step of themes we've been exploring in our writing.
That's definitely true.
For a long time, because I feel
I
like
agree.
that feels like the final step in maybe like a string of short stories.
Yeah,
that
for
you,
sure.
that you've worked on, that idea, which I think is like makes sense. Like I think if you spend a long time writing short works and then you go to your novel, like drawing on kind of everything you've explored across like a range of short stories and then kind of bringing it all together to be like your central,
like your novel.
Like your novel. Like I think it makes sense that like I think a lot of people probably who take that path are gonna end up with, that was kind of the final stone in this pathway of like whatever theme I've been exploring for a long time. And it can be hard to know what your themes are. You keep coming back to. Sometimes you don't know until other people come to comment and they're like, all your stories are about this, and it's like
that's embarrassing. I didn't even know.
What?
Well, it's interesting. I was just thinking about that, and I was like thinking about how I don't even feel like that theme that is in that novel and that was in so many of my short stories, like I don't feel like that is a theme that even comes up that often in my real life. And I'm curious if you feel the same way.
I agree. I was about to say, I don't think the themes you explore over and over in your writing are necessarily themes that are related to your life. Maybe I'm just not able to like really psychoanalyze myself, but once a friend of mine was workshopping a story for me, and he gave me my copy back and he goes, maybe you don't want me to unpack this, but you know every protagonist you write has a martyr complex. And I was like, I don't want you to unpack that.
Please
but
don't.
Again, I don't think that just because there's a theme or type of character that comes up in someone's writing means it's reflective of them. I think it probably means that it's just something that they're trying to understand or that they like find interesting. Or maybe it's reflective of someone, you know, important that they knew or something. I don't feel that the central themes, the themes I explore a lot in my work, are necessarily themes that come up a lot in my life.
I almost feel like I feel very similar to that, and I feel like almost a lot of the themes that I do end up exploring, I think are things that I'm like almost nervous to like press on in my own life. Like they're things that I wouldn't do, or I am like that are like almost the antithesis of me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think there's this thing about fiction where you can explore the decision you would never make. Yeah. And you could explore what it feels like to make the decision you would never make. Feel the thing you would never feel. Yeah. Think the thing you would never think. My characters are a lot more judgmental than I am, typically. Yeah. I'm not a very judgmental person.
No. I feel like you're one of the least judgmental people I know, and your characters are like, this stupid bitch the other day.
Yeah, exactly. My characters literally are like so judgmental. And not in ways that I condone. Like, I think a giant plot point in my novel is the main character's like actively slut-shaming her sister in her mind. And it's like, I think it's because, not in that particular context, but I think it's just like a way to explore something that is so unlike yourself, but understand what it would be like. You know, it's almost easier for me to write a character who's going through the world judging everyone for everything all of the time, because it's like easier to grab onto. Like I find the closer a character is to me, the harder it is to write them.
Yeah, definitely.
Because I'm always like, would the character do that?
Or would
I do that? And it's harder to find those like
access points.
Access points, like the angles of the character. But if the character is very different from you, it's just like, this is what they would do, and it's very obvious. You're never mixing up their perception of the world with your own, because it's very obviously like not your own.
When I'm writing a character who's very similar to myself, I also like worry more about the decisions they're making. I kind of like moralize them. I'm like, is that the right thing to do? Like, is that wrong? And it's like, when I write a character who's not like me, it's almost like sometimes it's almost like
there's freedom to that.
There's a lot of freedom, and it's like also like the road not taken. Like it feels like you're in the Robert Frost poem, and you're like, okay, I thought about doing this. I decided not to because it's definitely not something that is in my character, but I definitely like considered it. There was like a day when I thought about it, and I, you know, it's not me, but I thought about it. Yeah. And so, you know, like, or like the protagonist of my novel, like I think I've said to you before, is like if my like id and my ego had like an unsupervised baby, and they were just like, this is the protagonist, and like it's not at all me, but it's like if I were like narcissist who like only lived for like hedonism, then it would be me. I think as like female coded people, I think it's really stressful to write a character that's close to you. Because you're like, what if I got called Mary Sue?
I have so much thoughts. I have so many thoughts about this. Literally, this could be a whole other episode because I've been thinking about this for a long time. I have made decisions with characters that were made only because I felt other people would perceive the character as a version of me.
Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I have never written a character based on me because that is not appealing to me. I'm not, honestly, I'm not interested by myself.
Me neither. Like, oh my god, I hate writing creative nonfiction for that exact reason.
I don't think I'm compelling because I already live inside my brain.
Yeah.
And obviously, like, it's good to be, like, very self-reflective and stuff, but understanding myself better is very different from understanding the world better. And I write more to understand the world better, I think, than myself.
Bars, honestly.
So I've never written a character based on me. I've written characters who superficially may be closer to me.
Yeah.
But I've written a lot of characters in my life, so of course a handful of them are going to be more like me or share a superficial trait. There's one character in particular that I have always been told by everyone is me. And I know that she is not June.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you have like one or two things in common, but I don't think you're very...
I think it's just because, and I think I get this more from people who don't know me very well, it's just because we both, like, introverts.
Yeah.
We both just have, like, we're both introverts, and, like, honestly, she's way shyer than I am. Like, I think she's more, like, she's more similar to how I was when I was, like, 15 in that way. But we're not the same, and she's not based on me. Because someone who doesn't know me that well could... pick up on, like, very superficial similarities. I do find myself, moralizing her because I think about how it's like, I don't think about that with Sybil. Like, I don't think anyone's gonna think that Sybil is based on me. Or partly because the circumstances of that story are clearly not based on the circumstances of my life. And so I don't worry about people thinking that this character is, like, a literary version of me. Because pretty blatantly no. But I do with June, even though I know it's not the case, but people have told me that before. Again, people who don't know me that well, and so it's like, you don't really, where are you getting this? But we don't have the same backstory or life or an even personality or interests or aspirations or anything. But anytime she does something that is, and honestly, like, she makes mistakes in the book that I don't believe I would make. You know, like, she does things that I think are not the right decision. And I know that they're not the right decision.
But she hasn't learned that yet. Like, that's not her journey.
She hasn't figured that out. And so, I definitely find myself, like, moralizing that and thinking, like, people thinking that that's a reflection of me when it's not. At all. It's been 7 years that I've been writing this character.
God.
And I can think back to a lot of decisions that I made to make her look less like me. Yeah. So, like, this is so dumb just because I always had this feeling. I was like, I know how people see female characters and how they tie them to their authors.
Exactly.
I know that happens, even if it's not where the story comes from or the character comes from. And so, like, initially, when I first started writing the character, I had, like, shorter hair, like shoulder length hair, and so I gave her, like, long hair, but then I ended up growing my hair out, so it was pretty long.
That's so stressful.
And so and I ended up changing her description so she had shorter hair because I didn't want people to think that she looked I didn't want people to read her and think she looked like me. And again, she doesn't look like me in my mind, but on the page when you're just given a handful of physical traits, like, people will see what they see, right? And I think the most frustrating part of that is you can say a million times this character's not based on me, and people will just not believe it. They'll just be like, oh, well, you just can't see it. Like, this character is based on you. They're on Mary Sue. They're, like, an idealized version of you. It's like, honey, if this character is an ideal version of me, why is she messing up constantly?
Yeah, exactly. Like, why? And it's not like her flaws are, like, superficial. It's like, they are legit flaws. It's not like, oh, she's clumsy. It's like, no, like, she fucked up. And right?
Oh,
like,
no, like...
I don't know. I feel like it's so stressful to try and write a character. And, like, honestly, I have tried to write, like, one character who is, like, she isn't based on me at all, but I wanted to use her, this is Kitty, and I wanted to use her to explore themes that I, like, feel insecure about in my life. Like, themes that I still am exploring. Like, she's not at all like me, but I do want to explore themes that I'm still learning about and I'm still exploring. Like, her relationship with, like, men and her relationship with other women and, you know, how those things are related and her relationship with her body and that kind of stuff. And, like, that is probably, like, the only character that I've ever written who's, like, even close to me. but I find it so difficult to the point where, like, I've tried to write so many short stories about her. None of them have worked. I finally am like, okay, I think she's a novel. That makes sense because these are themes that I am not ready to explore in a short story. I don't know them well enough yet. Yeah. Exactly. But, like, again, yeah, I have changed her appearance a lot so that she doesn't, like, not that it was originally like mine, but, like, I have even changed it even further to make it even less like mine. And then also, even that was not enough. So now it's like a very magical realism world. And, like, her backstory is insane.
Same.
You know?
Like, now June can see ghosts.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
And I mean, her backstory was never like mine at all, but making it even more unlike mine. And I do think that like benefited the story, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But I think, like, you know when there's a character that you're like, people will think this character is me.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and you know it's not, but, like, how are you gonna explain that to someone, especially if they just see, like, well, you look girl, and the character look girl, so,
Honestly, I think part of the reason why maybe I will get this less with June now is just that I no longer look girl.
That's true. Yeah, you're like, I don't really present like a Mary Sue, so
I have ungirled myself.
In order to write your character.
Yeah, whereas, I mean, again, one way that we differ, I feel like gender is a big one.
Yeah.
In that I think June is very feminine.
Extremely feminine, yeah.
I think we have very similar relationships with these two characters. It's like, this character's not based on me. The closest to me of any character I've ever written. The only way they are based on me, and I don't think this is based on, is just that there are relevant emotions or themes that have come up in my life that I explore through this character, but I think that that's just a normal part of being a writer. Like, you have to draw on something, right?
Exactly.
And there are characters who are much more different from me that I think also draw on things that maybe I feel have been relevant to me at some point, and that's why I thought it would be interesting to explore in a very different context. Yeah. Because I don't like writing about my own life.
It's interesting because I think a lot of male writers, and especially, like, honestly, male movie makers, like male directors and stuff, there are so many movies, like Woody Allen, so many of his movies are just like, what if there was, like, a guy who kind of looked like a Woody Allen, like, always got the girl, and, like, was super hot, though, but he also looked exactly like me, and it's like, why can he do that? And then we're like, what if there's someone who's my age? And everyone's like, actually, that's you.
Part of the reason I've been told that June is based on me, this is wild, is that she's a university student. And it's like, I don't know how to explain this to you, but a lot of people go to university, and the fact that I went to university does not mean that a character is based on me just because she's a university student. But
that is a wild comparison,
Yeah, I think it's like, because I do think, and this isn't a theory, I think this is just true, that the farther you are from being a cishet white man, that more people will think your character is based on you. Definitely. If that's just like a default human and the character is the same as the author, people are like, no, the character is just like a character.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. But because what cishet white men get to be characters.
I think every like level of marginalization you share with a character, even if that's just like a fact about the character and a fact about you,
like
if you share that with the character, people automatically assume that the character is based on the author. Yeah. Just facts.
Yeah, and like honestly, very much bars. And it's like, if you're writing this character, like maybe it's just because it's the life experience that you have, so you feel like you have something to add, and you can speak
bring
to that.
Something. Yeah. Like, even not writing characters about myself, there's still things where I'm like, this is my experience in a general way, so I can bring a level of authenticity to the character.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
literally.
It's just like if you had a specific job and you were like, what job do I give this character? Well, I could either give them a job I've never done before that I would have to do a bunch of research on, or I could give them this job that I've done that's cool, that I can bring a ton of specific detail and knowledge on. Doesn't mean the character is based on me or anything that happened while I did that job. It's just like, I have a super rich well of knowledge and experience to draw on to make the writing better.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, you're always gonna get called writing a Mary Sue.
I know. Yeah. The wild thing is also getting called writing a Mary Sue when the character is obviously very flawed. Yeah. But I think people will then do this weird mental gymnastics where they're like, oh, well, if the flaws are flaws that I can, in my mind, even if I don't know the author, say that I believe the author has as well, then I can say that they're not intentional flaws the author has given the character. I can say that the author accidentally wrote the character to be like them, and therefore they have these flaws. And it's like, okay, I gave the character flaws because that's how you write good characters.
I don't know. That's, it's depressing to think about.
I know, yeah. I know, there's always this, like, how do I make a character far from me?
Yeah.
Unrecognizable to me. But then the rare times that they're close enough that you could call it, someone else could call it, you're like, oh no,
it's about to happen.
I've flown too close to the sun.
Yeah, and then also though, like,
even with a character that is not even like me, I'm still like, I've flown too close to the sun because she is shy.
Yeah. Which, like, I think you're just an introvert, but you're, like, pretty outgoing for an introvert.
I just like to say that I'm way funnier than June. I'm so much funnier than her. So I would just like to say that for everyone who thinks that, anyone who reads the books of May and thinks that she's a Mary Sue, I am a cooler, better person than she is. So why would she be an idealized version of me if I think that I am a more, like, actualized person and I have a way better sense of humor? Just saying.
Checkmate haters.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I completely agree with that. A lot of the characters that you and I both worry are Mary Sue's. We're like, what if it's a Mary Sue? And it's like, the character killed someone. Yeah. Like, I hope
the
not.
The character sucks.
The character has done every crime. Like, why are you worried about this? I'm very worried.
Well, I think both of us tend to write characters who suck.
Yeah.
And, like, June is the character one who sucks the least as a main character goes, but that's also just because she's, like, normie. Like, she's the most normie character.
Like, how much is she gonna suck? She's, like,
she's not
gonna...
at
university.
Yeah, like, she's not gonna be able to do war crime, like a Bildungsroman. Like, it'd be weird if she was doing war crime. It'd be weird if she was doing war crimes in a Bildungsroman. So, like, no, that's obviously not gonna happen, but I feel like we both tend to write pretty extreme... We tend to like kind of extreme concepts where, like, wild stuff happens, and so you're gonna end up with more extreme characters.
Definitely.
But I also think that people are more receptive to very flawed characters if they're more extreme than if a character is just, like, a generally good person but also messes up and has flaws, because that's reflective of them.
Yeah.
Like, there's a certain level of having to be like, I've probably done that.
Yeah.
When you read a character who's kind of just a normal person but fucks up.
Yeah.
And it's, like, maybe not that exact thing, but as a reader, there's a certain level of having to be like, I've probably done something similar, or, like, this is reflective of me. But with a character who's, like, murdered people, I hope you haven't. I hope you can't relate.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, like, that's never going to, for most people, come up in their... reckonings with themselves, and so you don't have to reckon with yourself if you're reading that type of character.
Yeah.
But you do kind of have to reckon yourself if you're reading with yourself if you're reading a character who's, like, a good person who makes understandable mistakes.
Yeah.
And then you're like, that's not understandable.
And then Twitter tears them apart for being problematic. And it's like, you mean like a person? People
will be much gentler to a character who kills 10 people than a character who is rude to their mom in one scene.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Because it's like, I think they see themselves and they hate it.
And it's like, they want to believe that they've never said something rude to their mom. And it's like, you were a teenager. Like,
well, it's like the new Disney Pixar movie, Turning Red, is getting so much criticism online. And I watched it the other night because I was like, I want to be able to say that it's, like, a pretty good movie, and I enjoyed it. Yeah. But the protagonist is a teenager, and she does cringy teenage things.
As you do.
Yeah. Like, she's like, oh, Mom, I have a crush on this boy band, and I really, 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 really want to go to the concert or else I'll die. And it's like,
that's what
cringy, for sure. Like. But I have done the exact same thing. Yeah. And so, like, I think a lot of people are tearing it apart because they're like, I can't believe you're like, showing these characters that are so annoying. And it's like, have you met a 13-year-old kid ever in your life? They're really annoying. Like, I was annoying at that age. It's fine. It's part of growing up. It's realistic.
Right? Because, I get more nervous writing characters that are, like, honestly, like, good, normie, than writing characters that I know are just, like, more extreme, like, representations of a person, because I'm like, I don't know, I just think those characters are actually usually more well received for some reason, despite being worse people. Yeah. And, like, I don't think a character's reception should be based on, like, how good a person they are.
No.
But I mean, I think a lot of readers still can't get past the need to morally judge a character. There's, like, this uncanny valley of, like, realistic but flawed that I think is, people are almost, like, really upset by.
Yeah, I agree. But it's like, even the most, like, accessible like YA novel protagonists
Yeah.
are like, if they're well written, are gonna have flaws. Like in the
Yeah.
Percy Jackson books, like I really loved those books when I was a teenager, and honestly still do. And like those characters, like all of them have at least one flaw that it's like their fatal flaw.
Yeah.
And so like I
It's
feel
like that's good writing.
yeah. And so I feel like, especially if you're writing like literary fiction, it's gonna happen. Your characters
Yeah.
are gonna have flaws, and they should have flaws.
Yeah, and like in YA, like I think I see a lot of adults critiquing YA for the main characters being whatever flawed or unlikable, and it's like most teenagers are doing worse than this. Like being
Yeah.
a teenager is a rough time. I was my worst version of myself as a teenager.
Oh, definitely.
And I
same.
wasn't the kind of teenager who like acted out or did anything wild or anything.
Yeah.
I was just like mopey and sad.
Yeah, I
But-
just had bad vibes.
yeah,
Like-
but I still was the worst, for sure, the worst version of myself that I've ever been.
Yeah.
And most Y protagonists who are even critiqued for being flawed are probably more well-adjusted than the average
Yeah.
teenager.
Yeah.
Sometimes maybe when you're adult, you don't want to think about how you were like that
Yeah.
when you were a teenager. Like, I just read The Most Precious Substance on Earth by Shashi Bhatt, and the beginning of that novel takes place when she's a teenager, and it goes into her adulthood, but at the beginning she's like 15, and it's like one of the most realistic representations of a 15-year-old I've ever read. At the beginning I was like, is this book YA or adult? Because it's pretty teenage sounding. But then I was like, I think this book is adult because it's so realistically teenage that as a teenager you almost couldn't read it.
Yeah.
Because you're not like aware that you're like that yet. But once you become an adult and you're
Yeah.
aware that you were like that, you can kind of look back on it and be like, I was really like that.
Well, you can't read it when you're in it
Yeah.
because it's so, you're already having to deal with that
Yeah,
in your
right?
real life.
You
You should
can't.
not have to also deal with that on the page.
It would be worse if you were being a teenager would be worse if you were self-aware of it, honestly.
I'm so glad I wasn't.
Yeah, that's the only thing that spared me.
Yeah. Fun.
Well, that was I like that we ended up going, who knows where topics went.
Honestly.
Yeah. Originally
Yeah.
I was just like, let's chat about acceptances.
Yeah.
But it ended up being like, yeah, we're gonna head off now. Pre-order Sophie's book if you made it to the end of the video.
Yes.
But I mean, do it
That'd be great.
anyways. Yeah, pre-order Sophie's book. It's great.
Thank you. That's
Take
very
join
kind.
the Rat King, and I'll leave like their like link tree with their or no, you have a website now.
I have a website now.
Yeah. Yep.
But yeah. Thank you so much
Yes.
for having me.
Oh,
This
thank
was
you
a
for
lot of
joining me.
fun.
Great
I really
time.
enjoyed it. Always lovely to talk to you.
It was a great time. Yeah, we always have good chats about writing
Yes.
that I'm like, it's kind of nice that like one was captured, I feel
Yeah,
like.
because this is basically the conversation we have most days, but it's just a new version of it.
Yeah. All right, I will set you free. All right. Thank you guys for watching.
Bye.
Bye.